Right now, we are now going to cross to a hall in Brooklyn in Pretoria where former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan is delivering a speech. And this is at one of 4 memorials that are being held for the late Ahmed Kathrada, who died last week. He was 87 at the time of his death. There'll be another memorial in Cape Town on Thursday. But let's go to Pretoria now and catch what former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan is saying.
Kathrada lived at a fascinating time. His life spanned so many decades. The 1940s, when the mine workers' strike took place, the Group Areas Act began to emerge. And then 1948, when the National Party won elections and formally started introducing what we today call apartheid. The 1950s, which were commenced with the Defiance campaign, the potato boycott, the Great Alexander bus boycott, the revitalization of the Congress movement at a mass level, some of which you are seeing today, and the creation of the Congress Alliance, so that you had all groups in South Africa belonging to a political alliance that would take on this evil system called apartheid and some of its outshoots like Bantu education. The Congress of the People in 1955 that gave us the Freedom Charter, which says that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, black and white, which even today inspires all of us to continue to strive for that non-racial South Africa, despite all the difficulties that we have. The 1960s, which ushered in the arms struggle, and it required a lot of courage and foresight and change in what appeared to be the principle of non-violence. And we, the future generations of activists, like many sitting here, and ourselves learned from these senior people that the struggle against apartheid is not a struggle against white people. The struggle against apartheid is a struggle against the system. But they also taught us the principles of non-racialism, of democratic practice, not just the idea of democracy, and of non-sexism would mean, and how we try to promote it in everyday life. His life was one of public service, and it's something that there's a lot of young people here today, which is very exciting and fascinating, because we've also got to recognize that whatever the situation we find ourselves in today, there is a thing called the state that is going to outlast all of us. It's going to require people who have a public service orientation, not the one where you fill your own pockets, it's one where you fill people's pockets with people's money. This generation also taught us what selflessness is about. In today's world, which is highly consumerist, highly selfish, highly individualistic, we only think of ourselves. What can I get for myself as an individual, as a family, and so on. Whereas the opposite is what is required today, and it's a new set of values, if you like, that we need to inculcate amongst ourselves. And the question for all of us and the many people who will attend memorials or marches or gatherings of one kind or another is how do we change this ethic in South Africa? Because you cannot have a situation where you have the second or the first highest level of inequality as we do in South Africa in the world. None of us can survive safely in that environment. So it's the job of this generation or generations of people to learn from the example of Ahmed Kathrada and ask the question, what am I going to give? What am I going to share? What am I going to do to extend my solidarity to those millions of people who still live in poverty? We very easily talk about the crisis around the 17 million grants that should be distributed and were distributed from earlier this week, and the tragedy of a political principle responsible for this. And I never, ever attack a colleague in public as a matter of principle. I'm going to break that now. Because there's a limit to the lies that one must tolerate. One must have the humility, the courage, and the sensibility to say, honestly, I didn't keep an eye on this ball. There's a mistake that was made. Don't blame the CEO of SASA, the poor chap. Blame the Treasury and all sorts of people for leaving 17 million people in anxiety. But the real point I want to make is if 17 million people in South Africa are dependent on grants, that's an unsustainable situation as well. It's our job to change that. So that 17 becomes 7, and 7 becomes 700,000. Comrade Kathy had what you might call an uncompromising courage. And that's maybe you want to go back to the records of the Rivonia trial and see how they respond to questions from Percy Utah, who was the prosecutor, am I right? And the judge and so on. Humility and respect on one hand, but uncompromising steadfastness on the other hand. For what is true, for the decisions that Feroz had outlined, which I don't want to repeat. And it takes something, ladies and gentlemen, to say you can kill me if you like, but I'm going to stand by what I believe in. But his life is also an example of principled politics. You know, sometimes many of us think that to be called a so-called politician is to be a perpetual liar. That's not necessarily the case. And there is a thing that you can learn from this generation and many others, that there is principled politics, where your conscience should guide you in terms of what is right and what is wrong. Your conscience should guide you to ensure that all of your energy and resources are spent in the right kind of way. But let's look at the last 10 days in South Africa. They've been fascinating, isn't it? We were on a trip, on a road show. I mean, most of you would have thought a road show is a rodeo show. So at least you learned now in the last week what a road show is. It's when we go as political office bearers and as officials, and on this occasion with business and labor, out to the world where we borrow money. We'll have to, the South African government, I can't say we anymore. I like to say politely, you know, I haven't been fired, I've been relieved of my responsibilities. So this is where, from Trevor Manuel's time, you go out to people who are willing to lend us money. This year, the government will borrow $1.5 billion. So depending on the rand exchange rate, that can mean anything in terms of the equation. But that's a lot of money. 40% of our even rand-denominated bonds, in other words, bonds that you pay for in rand, are owned by foreigners. So some people deliberately don't want to understand that these sorts of roadshows are quite important for the country. It gives us the opportunity to borrow 150, 160 billion rands. We'll have to pay another 130 billion, or 130, 140 billion rands in debt, in interest on our debt. And those are the responsibilities that anybody who works at the Treasury has to carry on your behalf. So it starts with the roadshow, with an SMS that says, come back, which means you've got to change your flight from a Tuesday back to a Monday. And that was the directive that we received. A day or so later, Comrade Kathy passes away, as Comrade Tshwane was indicating. There comes this tremendous funeral and send-off for a comrade who deserves that and more. And then the relieving of responsibilities, or what is now called, the reshuffle or the great shuffle, depending on which way you want to look at it. And then on Friday, we are told that there's a downgrade. Was it Friday or Monday? I can't remember. It's a long, short week. And it was Monday. And that's a lot that has happened in South Africa over a very short period of time. And a time that we need to digest carefully to ask where are we? And what is it that we can learn from Ahmed Kathrada's life that will guide us through this kind of period, which has generated such passion and concern and activism amongst ordinary South Africans and activists of all sorts of backgrounds in different organizations. We often talk about Kathy's values as our young lady did. And don't worry, Feroz is not sending you to Pretoria Central. not just yet. So values can just remain ideas. It's nice to be honest, but then you carry on with dishonesty. Values can become an inspiration, where it keeps warning us that to have integrity means that your gut should tell you what is right and what is wrong. You don't have to think about it, mull over it, research it, to see whether dishonesty is dishonesty or honesty is honesty. Values should be guides to ourselves on a daily basis, so that we can, both in our family lives and personal lives, but also in public life, ensure, as the quotation from Father Kathrada indicates, what is the correct thing to do if one is part of a public service organization. But I think what comrades like Ahmed Kathrada, Nelson Mandela, and others show us, and this is the year, the centenary of Oliver Tambo's birth as well, so people, great leaders like him as well, is that for them these were not things that were extraneous, they were part of their DNA. It was part of their system. It's how they thought about life, how they thought about politics, how they made decisions, and how they cared for all South Africans, to the extent where they were willing to say, you can take my life if you want to. Kathy can also teach our younger people what it means to be humane and display humanitarian characteristics, so that you, as I said earlier on, don't just care for yourself, but care for others. And as parents, we have a huge responsibility to actually ensure that the young people that we bring up are taught these new values, where you share and you do care and extend solidarity. He is one of that generation for whom humility came very naturally. So anybody who met him would recognize this giant person with great intellect, great sense of history, great humor as well. As I said in Johannesburg on Saturday, he would never fail to use the word tax when he met me on each occasion. So he had this tax as a preoccupation. I'm not sure why, I haven't figured it out yet. But he was always approachable, somebody that you could actually talk to. His life and what he's done, even post-Robben Island, demonstrates a tremendous resilience. In other words, you can throw as many stones as you like, as many difficulties as you like, but you know, they kept their spine straight and were uncompromising in the way they approached both political issues and other issues as well. It's a resilience that we as a nation need to demonstrate today in the face of all the difficulties that we have. These are winds that are going to buffet us politically, economically, but it mustn't frighten us. We must also remember that Kathy is a symbol of hope, right? He could have easily despaired after 22 years on Robben Island. He could have come back after 26 years as a broken person. But he walked out as a man of hope, as a person who inspired all of us to believe that we can build the new South Africa that we are in the process of actually building. And that resilience and hope is absolutely crucial. But above all, we can learn about what conscience means as well. Conscience is about saying that there's a time that arrives for all of us where mathematics and arithmetic and any other things that you want to take into account don't matter. It's the set of values that you have inculcated in yourself, that you believe in, and that you now have to put into practice, that must determine where it is that you want to place your cross, what is it that you want to do to solve the problem in front of you, and how will you be guided by that conscience. And I think many of us have challenges in that regard that I'll come back to you in a moment. But politically, it's also important to understand the political values of Ahmed Kathrada. Values which said, firstly, I'm a Democrat. So wherever I find myself, in the foundation, in a social club, in Robben Island, within the ANC structures, in Mkonto overseas, where I must engage in democratic practice. And democratic practice means I must allow everybody to have their say, I must listen to what the majority's got to say, I must account for what I do, and I must consult on the way in which I make decisions particularly if I hold leadership positions. But above all, in our kind of context, it means remember the Constitution, remember the rule of law, remember that that's the law that all of us created as the basis of the new South Africa that we want to hand over to future generations. We can't disrespect that Constitution now. Secondly, he was, as I said, uncompromising. Many people that are sitting here have had experience with the police in the old days. And we know of many comrades who went into the hands of the police, got a few knocks, and started giving evidence against their comrades. We've been through that experience. This is a generation that was uncompromising. You can do what you like, I'm not giving evidence. You can take us to court, you can do all the stuff that Feroz was actually talking about. And sometimes it is that uncompromising trait which keeps us alive at difficult times and makes us do the right things as well. As his famous letter indicates, he also believed in ensuring, as he said, that even great leaders like Nelson Mandela require advice and require to be told the truth, inverted commas, from time to time, or frankly given a set of opinions that they must take into account before they make certain decisions. And leaders have that obligation to actually remember the kind of advice that is given before they make decisions. But he was passionate against any form of injustice. And I think that we forget that injustice didn't just exist in the apartheid days. There are different forms of injustice today as well. When women are raped in the back of a taxi, when you have this incident where somebody gets knocked down, a couple gets isolated, and their two bodies are burnt, as I heard on the radio this morning, where somebody is discriminated against for no reason whatsoever. All of these are instances, and some of the stuff that Ivan Pillay and others were subjected to by the South African Revenue Service because they had an alleged rogue unit, and they never quite found the rogue, but we're still looking for them. Yes, please, applaud. So we must make it clear that being in an authority position doesn't mean that you can abuse that power. It doesn't mean that you can impose injustice whenever you feel like, however you feel like. It does mean that citizens will react to injustice, right? And it's very important to sustain that as we go into the future. Many people, ladies and gentlemen and comrades, sit with many dilemmas today. And some of those dilemmas I'm going to spell out. Now, if you see this phenomenon of state capture happening in front of you, where key institutions of the state are in the hands of, or getting into the hands of the wrong kind of people, who have no passion for the rest of us, who have no belief that they're there to serve 55 million South Africans by themselves, what do? Do you keep quiet because you're scared of losing your job or whatever the consequences might be, or do you try to speak up and say, look, there's something wrong that's going on here? When you see corruption happening around us, both in the private sector and in the public sector, this is not a public sector evil, if you like. It happens on both sides, sometimes more seriously in the private sector, as we saw in the instance of the 2010 Soccer World Cup stadium. Again, what do? Do you expose or do you keep quiet? Because you might be the quiet beneficiary of this process. And that's one of the dilemmas that some of our middle-class South Africans are having today. I might have been a beneficiary of X state policy or Y state tender. Now that means I must keep quiet even if there's gross corruption or injustice going on. That can't be the case. We have an obligation to ensure that we put the country on the right kind of passage. If we see that there are deliberate efforts in sectors of our economy to sabotage these parts of our economy so that only a small group of people benefit, whilst pretending that we're doing it in the interest of 55 million people, how do we put a stop to it? If we start misleading the poor into believing that populist rhetoric is the way to go, and anything promised in that light is something that you should actually believe. So there's this new phenomenon which says, you see, the rand can fall, All you have to do is pick it up. That is misleading the poor. Because if that rand really moves in the wrong direction, as it did when Mr. Nene lost his job for the wrong reasons, then there are huge consequences for your pension benefits, for your pension funds, for the prices that we're going to pay in South Africa, for the price at which we're going to import oil into South Africa to make diesel and petrol. All of that is going to cost, ultimately, the lower middle classes and the poor of this country. And that's the truth that they should in fact be told. We are also told that if we speak up, then we're engaging in some conspiracy. All of you are, by the way, conspirators today. That's why very often is here to keep an eye on you. Now, we cannot allow South Africa to step into that mode. If we are a democracy, we have the democratic right to voice a diversity of views, whether we like it or not. And we've got to listen to those views. And I'm not here to mobilize you against anybody. I'm here to persuade you, firstly, to respect the life and understand a lot more and go and read a lot more about the life of Ahmed Kathrada. I'm here to plead with you, teach your children the kind of values and life that he led, so that future South Africans and future generations will perpetuate his legacy. I'm also here to join this team of people who are speaking with you tonight to say, let's work together to create a better South Africa, because we have huge potential as a country, huge. And we're only 22, 23 years old as a democracy. Democracies that are 500 years old, 300 years old, 800 years old, have a lot more problems than we do. We don't have Trump yet, and we don't have Brexit yet, right? So if you get things right as South Africans, we have the potential to grow at 4 and 5%. We have the potential to create jobs for everyone. We have the potential to train all of our young people so they become effective in the marketplace. We have the potential to indeed engage in radical transformation, but radical transformation that benefits everybody. And one thing that is a bit confusing, forgive me for being personal, is that some people are interpreting my appearance on these platforms and the revival of my activism, so to speak. It was always there, by the way. But when you're finance minister, you've got to be very careful what you say. Otherwise, you'll blame me, you see. This is not about Mthalisi Jonas or Ngwako Ramatlodi or Pravin Gordhan saying, I want my job back. I don't want the job back. I was supposed to retire a long time ago. But don't try to malign me in the process. Because many people I respect said to me and to others, your integrity is the only thing left at the end of the day. Somebody attached that to them. So let me say, remember that little slogan that developed last year, let me do my job. I didn't apply for this job. I was asked to take it. Senior people in my organization said, please take the job. Others said, please stay there. Doesn't matter the stick you are getting, including false charges, etc., etc. Because we have a role to play and a small, humble contribution to make to keep South Africa stable so that all of you can actually benefit. And suddenly, all that is forgotten. I even said when I was asked to take this job, but there are others, A and B, I named two names, who are competent people in South Africa. Why don't you take them? No, we want you. But you take the job, and within a month, the famous 27 questions arrive. Not only do they arrive at my desk, they also arrive at the desk of the media as well. And I didn't put it there. So let's get back to Kathy and ask the question, what is to be done? I think as citizens we need to be more engaged, and it's good that you have meetings like this, and I hope you have many more, so that you can become a lot more aware of what's going on globally. What does Brexit mean, for example? And what implications does it have for us in terms of exporting our goods, accessing the European market, accessing the UK? What's the geopolitics in the world today? Where is China, where is Russia, where's the United States, where's Africa, where do we fit in what is becoming a very complex world? What would jobs look like, as I said earlier on, in 10 or 15 years' time? Because our children are going to grow up into that environment, and we should start thinking ahead. But also, how do we collaborate with one another to grow our economy in a more inclusive way, and certainly in a more transformative way as well, and tap all the talent that we have in this country, so all of us can make a contribution to a better future. Be aware of all the dynamics within our environment. In Johannesburg, I said, connect the dots. Don't look at events in an isolated way. Look at the relationship amongst those events. And what does it actually mean for us? Because you ultimately are South Africa, not us. We just hold the office temporarily. You are South Africa. This South Africa belongs to you. So you should understand what are the dynamics that are going on. And every single day, ask yourself, what can I do for the unemployed youth? What can I do to have less people receiving grants because they're earning their own income? And how can I share my talents, my generosity, or my income or assets in a way in which I can extend my solidarity to everyone? Amongst the progressive organizations, we must plead for unity so that they can also be part of a process that helps us to get over this current mini crisis and contribute to a better future. But many of us who've been with the ANC for many decades, a little bit less than Kathy, a little bit more than some of you that are here, we want to see a united, dynamic, and representative ANC. We want to see, once again, this organization that is in touch with all sections of our people and truly represents the aspirations of all of us. And it's a dream, I hope, that we will still fulfill. Thank you very much.
That was former Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan speaking at a memorial for Ahmed Kathrada, one of 4 that will be taking place across the country. The next one, I believe, is in Cape Town. That's going to be taking place on Thursday. And in his speech, he was drawing on the lessons that could be learned from the life that Ahmed Kathrada led. He talked about him being a principled man, one who had principled politics, whilst often displaying humility and respect. He was always quite steadfast and uncompromising in his character with the principles that he carried, and that we should be teaching our children and teaching the next generation these values. He talked about, and he said things like, we shouldn't be tolerating lies. We should be looking around and seeing where there's corruption. And we must ask ourselves, do we tolerate it? Do we expose it? That there was only so much that we could learn. He then took us through his journey of the days where he was recalled from Europe on his road trip and then brought back to the country. And he said that, look, I didn't appoint myself. I was asked to do the job. And I even suggested 2 names, but they said, no, we want you. And very soon after that, he said he received 57 questions that came to him at night. He says, let's work together, build a better South Africa. He said that we shouldn't mislead our public. We should be fair and honest with them. And he says that, we should be asking ourselves questions like, what can I do for the unemployed youth? How can I use what I have to help others? So it was a message really about remembering Ahmed Kathrada on the one hand. What did he live by? What were his values? What were his principles? How can we translate those into our current situation and work together to build a better country. As I said, he says now he feels freer to be able to speak now, but he's not trying to mobilize anybody against anybody. He was quite categorical about that, but rather just to get us to think about what's happening around us and be aware, but also about geopolitical issues, where our place is in the world, so that we can make better decisions, and that our hearts should guide us and teach us and tell us what is right and what is wrong. Okay, so that was Pravin Gordhan, former finance minister, speaking at an Ahmed Kathrada memorial a short while ago. Right.